Shri Sudham Patel, President of Bharat Vikas Parishad Thane, and Mr. Ramakant Agarwal, who so generously introduced me and possibly very excessively, and Professor Ashok Modak, whom I am meeting after a very long time, thanks to this meeting. And there are many friends here, acquaintances, and my welcome to all of them. And in an audience like this, consisting of very knowledgeable and competent people, is difficult to arrange. So I am extremely happy that such an audience has been arranged for me to share my thoughts this evening. You know, this country is now having huge question marks in its mind. 10 years back, it had aroused great hopes and prospects of emerging as a global superpower. In fact, no government of a different party which takes over power gives compliments to the previous government. Every new government which takes over says the previous government has left this country in a bad state and we are going to do good. But when the previous government, NDA's term ended, and Mr. Chidambaram became the finance minister in the year 2004 after the elections, in his budget speech of July 2004, if I remember right, the date is 4th July, he said the economic fundamentals of India are very strong and the balance of payments robust. You know, these are very important things. Why the balance of payments, which is the net result of a country's external transactions, whether it is trade, financial, services, whether a country in its international relationships is having a surplus or deficit. This is external, or what they call as the current account surplus or deficit. He said that the balance of payments is robust means that the balance of payment account, the external account of India, is in favor of India. Why it is important? People connected with business, finance, bank, and the general economy will know that when you are trading or dealing with the world, if you have got to get income from the world net over what you have to pay, that means your country has earned from the world. In 2 years, the last 2 years of the NDA rule, India had a net surplus of $22 billion on the external account. One will not be able to understand the significance of it unless one knew that in its entire history from 1950 to 2004, in 54 years, only in 4 years India had surplus in the external account. 1976, 77, 77, 78. For 27 years from 1950 to 1977, India had only deficits. Deficit in external sector account means erosion in the rupee value. Rupee depreciates. And you borrow money outside for survival. This was the position of India from 1950 to 1976. 76, 77, 77, 78, we had a small surplus. After 77, till 2002, for the 25-year period, we had only deficits. So in 2003, 2004, 2002, 2003, 2003, 2004, we posted a very large external account surplus. You know, this is a very important development because India was always written off as a non-performing economy for a long time. In fact, we were made to feel that we are not capable of performing as an economy. We are not efficient people. Our country understood God, it understood culture, it understood civilization, it understood architecture, it understood literature, it knew everything. But it did not know economics. This was the idea that has been dinned into us by universities, colleges, think tanks, public discourse, media. And we all believed it, particularly the English-educated Indians' appreciation of India came from what the Westerners told about us, Western historians, sociologists, economists, political thinkers, intellectuals. So we believed that we are not capable of performing at all. And so we have to receive thoughts from outside. In fact, one of our thinkers, Professor Raj Krishna, in the year 1978, he was an economist, advisor to Government of India, a socialist thinker. He was asked a question, Dr. Raj Krishna, that we are following the same socialist policies, which Russia is following, East European countries are following. How is it they are progressing faster and we are slow? And he gave an unbelievable answer. What do? We are Hindus and so we can have only Hindu rate of growth even if we follow socialist policies. You know, this may be an off-the-cuff remark, unthought remark, or a remark to escape further investigation into what he was not about, what he was incapable of saying or articulating. But Robert McNamara, the World Bank president, took these two observations, India and Hindu rate of growth, and addressed at least half a dozen conferences all over the world from 1978 onwards, saying here is a country which is a very large country, 1/6 of humanity, which cannot stand on its own leg. It will always be begging for survival, and please give donations for us to see that India lives above poverty and hunger. This was the brand image of India in 1978, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83. But something fantastic happens in the year 1983. One Belgian economist by name Paul Bairoch, he analyzed the entire economic history of the world from 1750 to 1900 for 150 years and came out with a shocking finding that if you tabulate the economic growth achievements of all countries in the world, China was number 1 with 33% of world's GDP and India was number 2 with 24.5%. These two countries almost had 60% of world's GDP. And England and America put together had a share of only 2% of world's GDP in 1750. And he said the whole picture changes upside down. In the year 1900, England and America, which had just 2% of the world's GDP in 1750, waltzed to 41% of world's GDP. And India and China, which had 57.5% of world's GDP in 1750, they crashed to 8%. India's share being 1.8% and China's 6.2%. Till 1850, India's share of world GDP was 14%. In just 50 years, India crashes. And between 1880 and 1900, India witnesses 23 large famines in which 30 million people die. That was the time Swami Vivekananda takes a travel across the country. What he sees was hunger, poverty, illiteracy, a country dead, a civilization written off, our own people celebrating foreigners, decrying our own forefathers, intellectuals, our own way of life, calling ourselves backward. This was the situation in which Swami Vivekananda traveled across the country. And he went in 1893 and told the world, with that situation in the country, that here is a country which alone can make the world live in peace and harmony. And he told the world, we have a model which no other thought leader, no other great man could expound. That is, we can live with anybody and everybody. We can worship any God. We accept all gods. And people who were driven out because they worshipped a particular God, they all came here. We kept them in our bosom. Whether it is the Jews or the Parsis. And he told the world that something which the world did not know. And in 1897, he told Indians something else. He said, you are in such bad condition, but I am having a vision. And that vision is as clear as I am seeing you. He told the audience, I am seeing that vision. That vision is that Bharat Mata is sitting on the throne and ruling this world. Anybody would have thought that Swami Vivekananda had gone mad. That was the situation in 1897. He said in 50 years we would get freedom. 1947, we got freedom. You know, he was a great visionary. He was a seer. And we just celebrated his 151st anniversary. 150th anniversary, we just completed the 151st birthday of that great man. He was just 30 when he addressed the world Parliament of Religions. That was the first public meeting he addressed. He never addressed public meetings earlier. You know, in the 150th anniversary of Swami Vivekananda, the National Intelligence Council of America, which is the think tank attached to the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, they came out with a report, what the world will be in 2030. And in that report, it is said, all the major world powers today will become regional powers. There will be only 3 major world powers, which are called global powers. That will be America, China, and India. His vision is proving to be true. The germination of the concept that India can become a power, that we can become a military power, we can become an economic power, we can become a cultural power, we can become a soft power, we are a hard power, all this originated in 1998 when the Pokhran atom bomb blast took place. Till then nobody was bothered about India. India was a great country, it was a country of Buddha, it was a country of Gandhi. It's a country which preached peace. Nobody bothered about this. But the moment India exploded the atom bomb, the change, an advertisement executive, she wrote an article in the Economic Times. In that article she said, no, she, being a housewife from India, but gone to great heights in the advertising profession. She would go abroad but would not stay in hotels. She used to stay with her friends and relatives abroad. She said whenever she stayed in their houses, the way they used to abuse India, a country, a rotten country, a third-rate country, a corrupt country, this country will never succeed. It is doomed to fail. She said, many days I could not sleep. But everything changed on one day. That was the day on which the Pokhran atom bomb was exploded and the entire non-resident Indian population celebrated this as Diwali. You know why? India wanted strength. Once it got that strength, the entire world pounced on India. Sanctions, technological, financial. Every country put sanctions on India. And in fact, our own intellectuals, economists, they said, what rotten thing this government has done. But this government came out with a scheme. That our weakest sector is the external sector. Foreign exchange is our weakest sector. That is where the world will put pressure on us. Because we don't print dollars. We don't print pound sterling. We don't print euro. But we need it. That is where the pressure would come. Our foreign exchange reserves are poor. Why I am mentioning it is that is a context which we have to handle today. At that time, the government appealed to the non-resident Indians. We want $5 billion. You please contribute to the India development bonds. At that time, nobody from outside would trust India with $1 because whether India would return that money or not was a big question mark. But the non-resident Indians contributed not $5 billion but $6.2 billion. You know, the world took notice of it. There is an Indian spirit. That is how the world, which began treating India as an untouchable because India exploded atom bomb, slowly began to come. It is not just a collection of mass of people without spirit. It is a country which has developed its own pride. And then you see it never turned back. That is why in the year 2004, India had achieved high level of savings. It had external surplus. It had contained fiscal deficit. Unbelievably, in 5-year period, we generated 6 crore employment. Unbelievable. No country in the world was able to do it. The spirit of India was aroused. This was the condition in which the new government took over. That is why Chidambaram said, yes, we have a robust external sector and our economic fundamentals are strong. And see what this government does in the last 10 years. The huge constructive work that had happened, I would put it that government is primarily responsible for whatever good or bad happens in this country. But there is no doubt the NDA government shifted the paradigm of India. India, which was a pushover, a country which was considered to be weak, it came to be recognized as a power. We were recognized as a nuclear power and not as a nuclear untouchable. Great diplomatic efforts went into it. That's how in 2002, 2003, 2004, India's development, India's potentialities were being watched. In the year 2003, India entered the Global Entrepreneur Monitor study. And in that study, again surprising results came. That as compared to China and America, the total entrepreneurial population of India in the age group of 16 to 64 was 18%. 11% America, 11% China, 10% America. That is how India came to be branded as an entrepreneurial power. And if you look at what happened between 1991 and 2011, 20-year period, you know, because this is a period of great learning for me. I am a corporate advisor. I have moved in different parts of the world. I have been trained in the Western model of development, but my entire understanding of India, Indian people, Indian communities, Indian business, everything underwent a change when I started traveling across the country in 1991-92. When this liberalization, globalization mantra began to dominate and came and hit us like a tsunami. At the time we were told without foreign investment India cannot develop. And we were told our manufacturers were told that you can't manufacture and sell because you need global scale of operations. You need global level of investment. You can't produce steel for the Indian market. You have to produce steel competitive at the global level. You need that kind of investment. You can't manufacture trucks. You can't manufacture cars. So you can't manufacture. You better sell it. This was the pressure under which the Indian business operated in 1992, 93, 94. That is the time I started taking a travel across the country and found the picture was something different on the ground, whether I went to Ludhiana, Batala, Rajkot, Jamnagar, Morbi, right down 4-5 years we did nothing else except to study India, for which there is no textbook available. There is no university course available. It is at that time I came to Thane also. Then I found that what operates on the ground is very different from what is being perceived. I will give you a small statistics. You all look at the Economic Times and Business Standard as to what is the Sensex of India. Sensex of India consists of 30 Indian companies. You know the contribution of the 30 Indian companies to Indian GDP is just 1%. And you decide the economic prosperity, performance, rise or fall of India by looking at the Sensex. The entire BSE 500, which exhausts 90% of the listed companies in India, produces just 4.5% of India's GDP. The entire listed and unlisted corporates in India put together today produces 14% of India's GDP. It used to produce 12% of India's GDP in 1991. In 13 years, it has just improved by 2%. You know, the private sector in India used to employ 75 lakh people in 1991. It employs 115 lakh people, just an improvement of 30 lakhs with all this IT, with all the growth in the financial sector, with all the growth in the stock market. 30 lakhs addition, nothing more. The government sector employment has come down from about 200 million to 200 lakhs to 173 lakhs or 174 lakhs. It has come down. Private sector employment has gone up. How has India been employed? The economic census of 2005 says the largest economic performance has been by the non-corporate sector, in which there are 43 million non-farming enterprises, 75% of them unregistered, which employ 100 million people, for which the bank finance is just 5%. This is India. This is Indian economy. And we were told without foreign investment, India cannot develop. Between 1991 and 2011, statistics is available today, that the total net foreign investment which has come into India in the entire 20-year period, it is just 1.2% of the total investment in India. The balance has been by domestic savings. 78% of the domestic savings is family savings. This is what we said in 1991, 92, 93, 94. Taking a travel across the country, that India has domestic capital, domestic savings, domestic consumption. We have what we known as domestically driven economy. All this materialized and we became a seeming economic power, rising as a political power in the year 2004, when this government took over and began systematically demolishing the economy, about which I am going to tell you just now. Today we have a barely surviving economy. You know, in this 10-year period, the foreign debt has gone up from $112 billion to $426 billion till December. And all our foreign exchange reserves are represented by debts. Our foreign exchange reserve in 2004 was about $200 billion. Today it is, Chidambaram claims with pride, I have brought it back to $300 billion. But you only borrowed money. Short-term debts have gone up by an amazing, I'll just say these are figures which are unbelievable really, that nothing is in the discourse, no newspaper writes about it, no economist talks about it, no academic institution discusses about it. It's a huge surprise. The foreign exchange reserves touching 300 billion and projected to rise to 325 billion before the UPA term ends is the proud claim of Chidambaram. But he would not utter a word about almost fourfold rise in foreign debt from 112 billion to 246 billion by December 2013. He will not utter a word about the rise in the short-term debt by 26 times. You know, borrowing short-term abroad is the best way to destroy the rupee, because you have to pay back in 3 years, 4 years. And this was 4% of the total debt in 2004. It is now almost a quarter. Out of $426 billion, 1/4 debt is short-term debt. External commercial borrowings have risen by 6 times. And trade finance has risen by 22 times. Why will the rupee not fall? The rupee fell because of extravagance. And a lie was being told and believed and propagated, and people are evangelized into believing that lie. What will we do? Oil is something which we cannot avoid importing. Oil imports have dented the external sector. And our country is having such a lust for gold. It is gold which is responsible for it. I tell you, in no other country such lies could be told. I am going to demonstrate it to you as to how these were secondary reasons. The most important reason why India began to incur external deficit. $22 billion was the surplus which the previous government left. Out of 54 years, only 4 years you had surplus. Small surplus of $1 or $2 billion in 1976 to 78. A substantial $22 billion surplus in 2004. See what this government does immediately. The very next year, you have $22 billion surplus. 2004-5, $3 billion deficit. 2005-6 and 6-7, $10 billion each year deficit. And in 7-8, $16 billion. 8-9, $28 billion. 9-12, $38 billion. 10-11, $48 billion. 11-12, $78 billion. 12-13, $89 billion. The total is $339 billion of external deficit in a matter of 9 years, which completely knocked down the Indian rupee completely. From 45 rupees to $1, the rupee depreciated to 68 rupees to $1. You could buy $1 at 45 rupees in September 2011. By August 2012, you had to pay 68 to $1. Crash. Many people said this crash means exports. No exports. On the other hand, every rupee of fall in the value in relation to dollar means 10,000 crore additional rupee payment for oil. The same amount of dollar, you have to incur more expenditure in rupee that you have got to charge on to the people of India, or you have to bear it as a subsidy in the budget. 2,30,000 crores is the additional liability India incurred because of the fall in the value of the rupee. Did anyone understand what was the consequence of the fall in the value of the rupee? And a country which is having huge imports, when the rupee value falls, imports become costlier. Who will absorb that cost? The banks, the government, the people. And there is no intense analysis among businessmen, FICCI, CII, media, economic analysts, parliamentarians, completely in the dark, kept the country in the dark. $339 billion was the current account deficit, which eroded the foreign exchange reserves from $300 billion to almost $250 billion. Now we have begun borrowing money. We have begun borrowing by paying more interest to the NRI depositors. We have borrowed $23 billion to restore the foreign exchange to a respectable figure. But every financial analyst knows that your foreign exchange reserve of $300 billion is not your own money. It is debt. And it has dented the economy. And why this $339 billion deficit occurred? We were told it is oil. We were told it is gold. I am going to tell you the true story. You know, in this period, something unbelievable happened, unnoticed, undebated, even today. The amount of capital goods India imported in this 9-year period was $587 billion. The average capital goods import used to be $10 billion a year. It could be $20 billion. It could be $30 billion. For 9 years, $30 billion means $270 billion. But how could it be $587 billion? And we ran a huge trade deficit. From whom did we import? We did not import from America, Germany, France. We imported from China. We ran a trade deficit of $175 billion with China. It is 5 years India's defense expenditure. 3 years China's defense expenditure. We never put any anti-dumping duty. We were afraid of China. Till 2003, 2004, China will face the maximum anti-dumping duty from India. India was not such a big trading nation like America. But we were number 2 in using anti-dumping duty. Every nation has to protect its market, protect its industry, protect its exports. That is the game. Everybody will talk of free trade, but nobody will do it. Everybody will talk of freedom, nobody will give. But we talked and believed because we had such a docile leadership who wanted appreciation from the white man. You have intellectuals who have no independence. You have businessmen who have no intense knowledge. The economic discourse of India was informed only by illiteracy. $587 billion is the capital goods import. You know what is the net oil import? You will be stunned. It is just $505 billion. Less than the capital goods import. Oil always used to be high. You don't produce it. Capital goods you produce. L&T produces turbines. BHEL produces turbines. But you go and import gas turbines from China, which will work only for 12 years. You have BHEL producing, which will work for 20 years. But because China was giving suppliers credit at 1% interest, Ambanis and others began importing from there. And to facilitate this import, zero-rated duty facilities were given. As a result of which, the tax giveaways, as they are called, you are taxed at 33% income tax. There is a certain rate of customs duty, there is a certain rate of excise duty. Then exemptions are given. All of us pay tax. But you know how corporate taxation is? If a company earns more than 500, the effective rate of taxation for those companies is just 23%. Though the fixed rate, legislated rate is 33%. This tax giveaways used to be 2.5 lakh crores a year in 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8. At that time, the FRBM Act came, which said you must disclose everything in the budget. It is Indian budget is one of the most transparent exercises in the world. Many of us have not read the budget document. Budget document is a 1,000-page document. It is not just the finance minister's speech. Most of us comment and conclude and certify and give marks to the budget based on the finance minister's speech. But the details are in these 1,000 pages. And it says that year after year, 2.5 lakh crores is the tax waiver given to people, given to industries, big companies. Nobody has audited whether these tax benefits have resulted in development. No audit, no inquiry. Okay, till 2008. And in 2005, January, the Prime Minister as well as the Finance Minister, both of them made a statement. We have very low taxation in the world. And so we are going to reconsider the exemptions. These tax shelters we will remove. So we all thought in the February budget of 2005, all these exemptions will go. No exemption was withdrawn. Then why was this threat issued? For people to go and settle with them and see the exemptions are not withdrawn? 2008. In 2009, 2008 end, this global financial meltdown takes place and Chidambaram becomes Home Minister and Mr. Pranab Mukherjee becomes the Finance Minister. Then they give huge stimulus. The tax giveaways double. It becomes 5 lakh crores. In the last 5 years, the total tax giveaway has been 30 lakh crores. The fiscal deficit is 23.5 lakh crores. External deficit of $339 billion. Fiscal deficit of 23.5 lakh crores. How will the Indian rupee be strong? You know why is a company's share is strong? Because the company's profit and loss shows a surplus. If it doesn't show a surplus, it will stagnate. If it shows a deficit, it will decline. Take India to be a company and look at the balance sheet of the government of India, which is the budget. If the budget shows annually 4.5 lakh to 5 lakh crores of deficit, how will the Indian rupee be sustained? In addition to that, your external borrowings, your imports are more. And you bring in imports which hit the local economy. Now you look at, whenever you import capital goods, your local manufacturing must go up. That is the theory. Because these are capital goods. You don't need them. You use them to produce goods. See what happens. In the first 4 years of the UPA rule, the manufacturing growth was 11.5%. But in the next 5 years of UPA rule, the manufacturing growth comes down to 4%. And the capital goods industry, which was rising, it makes a net reduction of 10% in the last 2 years. L&T closes down its units. BHEL closes down its units. Jay Prakash is declaring bankruptcy. This is the effect of capital goods import. Tell me, where is any news item which you have read in the newspapers about it? After I wrote 3 articles in the month of January, the Engineering Export Promotion Council of India came out with a statement. Yes, because of the capital goods import, our industry is struggling. Why didn't you do it 3 years back, 4 years back? Nobody looks at the figures. 5 years back, 10 years back, it was difficult to get these figures, except after 1 year, half year, 3 months. Today, everything is on the computer. What is happening today is seen in the computer of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister of India, Planning Commission, Finance Ministry, Commerce Ministry, Reserve Bank. Everyone has the same data source. Not only that, they also know what is going to be the import in the next 6 months, because LCs have been opened, bank facilities are there, orders have been placed. You know everything. But you allow the economy to drift, virtually collapse. You know what saved India? The country was saved only by families. Most of us do not even know that family has any relationship to economics. You know, the Indians' family savings, which constituted 80% of the total savings of India. So savings of India went up from 21% of the GDP to 37% of the GDP. Now it is hovering around 30 to 31% of the GDP. This is what improved the investment of India from 24% to almost 40% for us to reach a 10% growth rate. Because there is a relationship between investment and growth. If you have 4 rupees of investment, on a capital output ratio of 4:1, you are supposed to produce 1% growth. That is why we invested 40% and reaped a 10% growth rate, in which the foreign investment was very minuscule. That means Indians produce the savings you needed. Indians not only produce the savings, they also produce savings from outside. You know, it is our children who are working abroad, sending money for their parents, for education of their brothers or sisters, or the marriages at home, or building houses. In the 9-year period, they sent $337 billion. It will not happen in America. Nobody is bothered about the family. It will not happen in England. Nobody is bothered about the parents. It will not happen in France. Nobody is bothered about their sisters. This is a culturally driven economy. Otherwise, we would have been bankrupt long ago. Have you ever read this in any news item? This is there in the Reserve Bank of India website. Remittances from abroad for family support. We just don't know Indian economy. We have no understanding of India. And you have finance ministers and prime ministers and deputy chairman of the planning commission who have no faith in India. They have not resided in India. 30 years they have been away from India. With the result, the rupee collapsed, external sector became weak, and understand that you didn't fare well in the external sector, you spent a lot of money, and what about the growth in the employment? Between 1999 and 2004, in the 5-year period, we produced 60.7 million jobs. As I told you, it is considered to be a record. If it had continued for the next 10 years, we would have lifted most of the people in below poverty line, like China had done. 10 years if it had continued. Another 12 million jobs. India would have been a superpower. You know what was the addition to the job from 2004 to 2010? You will not believe if I tell you the numbers. Just 2.7 million in this period of 6 years. just 2.5 million. Only 37,500 jobs a month. Completely, you were posting 10% growth rate. Chidambaram claims between 2004 and 2008, I was the finance minister. I produced 8.5% growth. Afterwards, Pranab became the finance minister. Don't ask me, ask him. He cannot reply. He is sitting in the Rashtrapati Bhavan like this. And fortunately, I have written an article in which I have somewhat said, you must give Pranab Mukherjee the due. UP added 14 million jobs in 2010, 11, 11, 12. This was not Chidambaram's. Pranab Mukherjee was there at that time. Only in 2012, Chidambaram came. So Pranab Mukherjee produced 14 million jobs in 2 years. You produced only 2.7 million jobs in 6 years and finished India. So our position today is, we have a weak external sector, we are weak on employment, our savings has come down from 37% to 30%, we have foreign debt grown from 112 million to 426 million. The economy has been dismembered in the most unthinkable way by a leadership which was just not worried about India. It was only worried about how to save the day in parliament from 2G and coal. This became the concern. So we have a bad economy. And our economic discourse is completely based on wrong facts. For example, take gold. Because we also must know how to handle this problem. Indians are not going to give up gold simply because the government wants them to give up. You forbid the import of gold, gold comes by smuggling. Smuggling has increased. You know, this is the history of India from 1950. When we banned the import of gold, Haji Mastan and Dawood Ibrahim took over the trade in gold. And even Lord Balaji had to buy gold for his ornaments only from Dawood Ibrahim. This was the position between 1950 and 1991. And so the government became wise. In the year 1992, they said we can't fight gold. You know why we began fighting gold? This is the American mindset. Many of us do not know, between 1934 and 1976, Americans would be arrested and sent to jail if they possessed gold. Gold was completely proscribed for private holding. It was nationalized. It was considered to be a wrong consumption. It was considered to be a consumption item. It was not considered to be an investment. But the Indian mind is different. It views gold as an investment. So you have to plan differently for the Indian mind. Unless you handle the problem of gold, you cannot handle the external sector of India. We made a study of 72 professors of management institutes as well as university economics department near Coimbatore in about 72 institutions. We made a survey of 72 women professors. And so we asked them what is their investment pattern. We said we first prefer bank deposits, then we want to buy a home, then we buy gold. They stopped at that. Then we said, what about stock market? No. Only 4 or 5 of them said we also invest in stocks. I said, you are teaching in the class every day the stock market is the most important thing. No. That is what the textbook says. This is our economic teaching, economic policy, economic discourse. Behavior is completely different. There is no honest connectivity, there is no real connectivity between the way the Indian people behave, particularly the Indian women. I want to tell you an episode. In the year 1993, 92-93, Dr. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister. There is one Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati, a very famous economist in America, who was the one who framed the entire WTO, World Trade Organization. A very respected man, he was called the God of Free Trade. And he didn't get Nobel Prize, but his disciple called Paul Krugman got the Nobel Prize in 2008. He always dedicated his knowledge to Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati. That was the stature of Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati. So he came to India. Dr. Manmohan Singh asked him, we are in a mess. How do we come out of this mess? He said, you can never come out of this mess unless you follow what I am going to tell you. You know what did he say? Your families are saving 19% of the GDP. This savings is very excessive. You must bring it down by one half. You reduce the savings from 19% to 10%. And this 9% savings should become consumption, expenditure, purchase, production, employment, and nobody can stop India. And he didn't stop at that. He said you can never make the Indian family spend unless you make the Indian women spend. If you have to make the Indian women spend, it's not an easy job because they are all very stingy. They are bothered about their family, they are bothered about their children, they are bothered about their husband, they are bothered about their in-laws. They have so much responsibility in their mind. You must make them free of all this responsibility. You bring in goods from abroad, textiles, jewelry, cosmetics and beauty parlor items, and keep them in a mall to make the Indian women forget their responsibilities and begin buying. You know, it was a serious advice given to the government of India. And the government began doing it. And newspaper and media were very happy. Advertisement songs, and we got advertisements, we were very happy. There were advertisement songs and music. The Indian women sang the advertisement songs, listened to the music, but did not buy the goods. What I am saying is proven by statistics. The family savings of 19% in 1991-92 went up to 28% in 2009. That completely changed the complexion of India. That is what made India grow 10%. Indian economy is basically feminine in character. So gold is an integral part of India. And so I had prepared a plan for gold. That's what I will tell you. There are several things which you can do. But two things if you do, you can turn the economy of India. One, you must bring back a part of the black money parked outside India by cheating India. You know, when this issue was taken up by the Bharatiya Janata Party in 2009, Jairam Ramesh said this is all an imagination. There is no such money outside India. Then the Global Financial Integrity came out with these calculations that between 1950 and 2008, 1948 and 2008, in the 60-year period, the total amount of money stashed out of India was $500 billion. Then even Sonia Gandhi had to say, we will bring back the money. Of course, not her own. Then even the Congress said, we will bring back the money. Congress has done nothing in this 10-year period to bring back the money because a small amount of money, $100 billion, why I will tell you, I have been working for it since 1986. I went to Switzerland, I investigated in 1986. I appointed one Fairfax agency to detect the number two money of Indians abroad. And I engaged them on an assurance from Government of India that 25% of whatever is discovered will be given to them as fee. We entered into a contract. And the Government of India arrested me and threw me in jail because I was dealing with foreign detective agencies and passing on information from Government of India. I was arrested for espionage on a forged letter. At that time I came to know there are billions of dollars of Indian money abroad. And that money can be brought back. Even $100, $200 billion out of what is believed to be $1 trillion of money residing outside India, which can turn the complete face of India. Next is gold. With that I will close my speech. You see, India imports 1/3 of world's gold production, between 1/4 and 1/3. And whether the government of India permits or not, this gold is going to come into India. So how do we handle this? You know, purchasing power is a very important power. A 1/3 buyer of gold can decide the world gold prices. But because we are not using that power, the world gold suppliers are imposing whatever price they want to impose on us. So I gave a scheme to Finance Minister, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, that India should build a buffer stock of 5,000 to 6,000 tons of gold. It is estimated that the gold stock in India is between 18,000 to 40,000, out of which 4,000 to 5,000 tons is in the form of gold which is not ornamented. It coins or biscuits or whatever. I said, now you have got to make the people invest this gold in government bonds, for which you have to give tax immunity. You say, I don't want to ask you where you got the gold from, what is your source. You are completely exempt from taxation. You put it in government bond for 10 years, 15 years. We will return the gold as gold and also give you a 2%, 3% return. And by this method, you can get 3,000 to 4,000 tons of gold. This is the estimate. And if you get 4,000 tons of gold, you already have 800 tons of gold. 4,800 tons of gold, you annually import about 800 tons of gold. If government of India says this year we are not going to import gold, the world gold prices will crash to 50%. The game is in your hands. And you can't do it without a buffer stock. Mr. Pranab Mukherjee was very impressed. He said, we will do it. Then he gave me a dinner and said, why we can't do it? He said, this Anna Hazare has started a movement saying that we are closely associated with black market aids and black money people. If I give tax exemption now, it will be a proof that we are only associates of black money people. That is how the whole thing was gone in the 2012 budget. But I think one honest leader, one capable person, one person who doesn't mind about the consequences and only bothered about the country, can turn this country in just 1 year. And I suppose this election will produce such a person. Thank you very much.